Good afternoon, everyone, once again. Uh, Welcome to this important public lecture. For those of you online, thank you very much for joining. And for everyone present, we are grateful for your time. Thanks for taking time off your very busy program to come and be with us here today. My name is Benjamin Shawa. I will be your moderator today for this public lecture that's being hosted by the International Growth Center in collaboration with ZIPA and the Economics Association of Zambia, EAZ. Sorry for the delay. We are happy to kickstart the program today, right now. And allow me to call upon the country manager for the International Growth Center, Zambia, Shahrukh Wani, please.
Good afternoon. Are you excited? Is there a better way to spend, is it Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday. There can't be. We're going to do a lot of gambling today. So we're going to bring out all the poker tables and see how development happens. So I've been given a very concrete thing to say to make sure I say all the right things and no more jokes about gambling. So first of all, on behalf of the IGC, I welcome you to our first of many public lectures here in Lusaka. We are particularly proud to be working with ZIPA and the EAZ on hosting this conversation today. It's also particularly good to see a lot of friends, familiar faces, and a lot of new faces who are going to become friends, I'm certain, taking time out in a weekday afternoon to join this conversation. We have about 70 people in the room and about 70 people joining online, but we expect more people to come as the conversation goes ahead. This lecture really goes at the core of what we try to do here at the IGC, which is helping drive economic growth in our partner countries like Zambia through data, evidence, and dialogue, and this is sort of the dialogue part of that. Over the past 2 years, we makers face day in and out in the women in to evaluate how government interventions and other public social interventions are working. A lot of public policies from doing what is working, what isn't, and that's where we see our role playing in, and that's what we try to embed. Finally, we try to support broader economic growth dialogue through bringing people together, bringing intellectuals together, experts of all sorts, from Zambia, from outside Zambia, to host important, interesting conversations. And I hope this. Finally, I want to say I feel in a very grateful mood. So I need to thank 3 particular people and constituencies. First of all, to our star attraction, Professor Stefan Dercon, for taking time in his very, very busy week here in Lusaka to spend with us this afternoon. And he has said that he will answer any questions you have. So please ask really, really tough, pointed questions later on in the conversation. What Stefan is particularly unique in is he's an economist who combines a very long career in research with practical experience, including in the UK's Department for International Development. And that's the sort of rare combination which is going to be profoundly a demonstration today in the lecture. Second, I want to thank FCDO for their constant support for IGC's work here in Zambia, but elsewhere. This wouldn't be possible, both financial support, but also non-financial support over the years. And finally, for the team behind the scenes, this event was put together in fairly last minute over the past week or so. So the organizing team consisting of IGC, ZIPA, and the Economics Association of Zambia, who put in all the hard work which goes to make sure the lights are on and the Wi-Fi is working and the invitations go out. So thank you to them. Can you join me in a hand of applause for the organizing team before we start? On that note, I'm going to stop taking time out, and we're going to just ask where's Benjamin? Yeah, there he is.
Thanks very much. At this moment, I would like to call upon Mr. Zali Chikuba, Executive Director for ZIPA, and then after which we'll have remarks from Dr. Nicholas Mainza, the EAZ National Secretary, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very far away from here, but I was going to be given a signal that event has already started. Nonetheless, allow me, I'm sure that everybody has already been welcomed. Allow me to reiterate the welcome that has already been given to this public lecture today. My name is Zali Chikuba, Interim Executive Director for the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research. It is my honor to stand before you this afternoon at this lecture, which is jointly being hosted by the Zambia Institute for Policy Analysis and Research, the International Growth Center, and the Economics Association of Zambia. Sometime back on the 16th of the previous month, I had a conversation, an online call with the country manager for the IGC, Mr. Shahrukh, and we had a productive conversation where we were trying to see how we can operationalize the MOU that exists between ZIPA and the IGC. And in trying to operationalize that MOU, we looked at the possible areas which we could then look at to begin. And we identified quite a few priorities that we could use to operationalize that MOU. And fortunately, there was a lot of common interest between the operations of the IGC and the operations of ZIPA. And we agreed that we were going to begin with an item that borders on improving public literacy on economic policy. And the public lecture series emerged as one of those activities that we would then begin our collaborations. And we should expect more of these activities because we have seen that we can do a lot more together by holding such kind of activities. This is because part of the development challenge that Zambia today experiences is that we have been grappling with the issue of public support towards economic policies. This has been since the time of went on into the time of the Patriotic Front government, and we see the same sort of challenge perpetuating even under the current government. what we see with the general public is that there is a lot of appetite for short-term gains at the expense of deliberate, long-term, and sometimes painful reform processes. And in that way, we pressure the policymakers and managers to adopting the short-term perspectives that are not very well aligned with the growth objectives of the country. There is need to improve, therefore, public literacy in terms of economic policies. There is need to improve on economic literacy in the general public. And we need to see a good balance of both the short-term gains and the long-term perspectives if we are to harness our resources properly for growth. And we're on to have Professor Stefan Dercon, who will be delivering. We believe that this is timely, a topic for us as we in Zambia. Before we delve into the insights that will be coming from Professor Stefan Dercon, I would like to highlight some key macroeconomic development in Zambia that require our reflection. Despite Zambia facing with that has the economy has posted quite some remarkable resilience. In 2023, the real GDP growth is recorded to have been at 5.2%, 5.4%. That is a marginal increase from the 5.2 of the previous year. The question that arises, how many countries that are going through the challenges that Zambia has been working well for us to see that kind of, I think that requires. The other issue is that while we have seen this sort of growth, we also are aware that the growth has not resulted from the sectors, the obvious sectors of growth that we had thought the growth should be coming from. That is energy, agriculture, mining, tourism, but it has been coming from other sectors. What should we do about that? Should we rethink our growth priorities? Or should we be considering reforming our economy so that keep on reforming, because we've been talking about the reform story for a long time. These are real points of reflection, even as we wait to hear what Professor Dercon is going to say today. We also are aware that the government has continued to underscore its commitment to restoring fiscal and debt sustainability. This involved quite a number of structural and governance reforms, including raising and safeguarding social spending and preserving financial stability. So just what level of public economic reforms are acceptable to the public? What should we be advocating? Because we do hear a lot of calls that some of the reforms that are being undertaken, for instance, the shift from subsidizing fuel to making fuel being cost reflective, is being touted as very punishing to the ordinary citizen. But we could not afford this subsidy previously. Up to this point, we're still grappling with about 500 million US dollars from the arrears that were accumulated because of the unproductive subsidy. So just what level of reforms should be acceptable to the public? These are questions that we need to be asking ourselves even as we listen. We know that projections for 2024 have been revised downwards from the region of 5 to about 2.7 on account of the unprecedented drought that this country in 2023, 2024. This has highlighted how vulnerable the economy is to shocks. So what sort of preparedness should we be putting in place to ensure that our growth is resilient, even in the face of shock? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves. As we gather here today, it is critical to consider innovative approaches to development for a developing country like Zambia. Professor Stefan Dercon's lecture this afternoon presents an opportunity to reflect on what else we need to do to ensure that our economy grows with the resilience, and that we are able to ensure that we attain higher human development statuses as a country. Let us engage with the ideas to be presented today. Let's ask questions. Let's explore how we can apply the insights to our own context today. It is through such dialogues that we can collectively contribute to shaping policies that drive Zambia's development processes forward. ZIPA is committed to ensuring that we provide platforms such as this, and we hope that the partnership that we have engaged with the IGC and the EAZ to present such forums will continue. And we hope that you will be available to participate freely. Joining, and I extend a warm welcome to Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, to all of you, let me just simply say that enjoy the lecture this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm not here for a lecture. I'm here to be lectured. So, very few words. I think I'm here to give a welcoming remark. On to what my colleague, Bryson, has already mentioned. I think he's spoken a lot that concerns you and me. I am Nicholas Obi Mainza, the National Secretary coming from the Economics Association of Zambia. This is not my show. This is not the show for EAZ. Neither will it be a show for ZIPA. I want to say this is a show for Professor Stefan, because mainly we've come here for the lecture. Just want to encourage you. Very surprising, I'm starting with encouragement. I want to encourage you that pay attention as he's going to talk to us, all of us. Let's give him an ear, and then let's also participate actively. This then takes me on behalf of the Economics Association of Zambia. I want to extend a warm welcome to each one of you, and then thank you for joining us today, this afternoon. I would like to acknowledge the instrumental role of the IGC, that's the International Growth Center, organizing this event. Their commitment to fostering meaningful discussions and catalyzing actionable insights is commendable, and we are grateful for their partnership. Then this will not go without mentioning ZIPA as well. We are partners, and I also want to thank them and extend our gratitude coming from EAZ. Let's continue collaborating. Let's continue working together. The question before us this afternoon then is that, is a development bargain possible? This question is not for me. I think it's for you who are seated here. So begin digesting this within yourself. This resonates deeply with our collective aspirations for economic progress and social development as EAZ. As we convene here today, let us harness the power of collaboration and knowledge, sharing to light pathways forward. We need to look at the challenges and opportunities that lie, in the potential for transformative change. And at EAZ, Economics Association of Zambia, we are steadfast in our belief that informed discourse and evidence-based policy making are the cornerstones of sustainable development. Through our combined efforts, we can forge a future that is equitable, inclusive, and prosperous for all Zambians. I therefore extend my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for your participation because even just the mayor sitting here, you've already participated, right? And engagement in today's discussion, and we look forward to gaining insights from Professor Stefan Dercon. Then allow me to make mention one or two. I know you're already giving me signals that it's time, but please, for me it's just a minute, and my colleague was 10 minutes. Allow me then to mention that even as we are going to be discussing, as we are going to be interacting, please take these three key points I'm going to mention here. Let's look at economic transformation. Let's look at economic growth. And let's look at economic sustainability. For me, these are some of the questions that we need to be answering. How do we then attain this? I know whatever we are going to be talking about is something that needs to take us to, having a very sustainable, economy for the country, for the region, and for the continent. I wouldn't want to stay longer here, but simply the way that I came to, is just to thank you for coming, and that please feel at home. The professor is here to speak to us, to interact with us. Let's talk. You'll be given a platform where you'll be able to ask one or two questions so that you can be clarified. Otherwise, Professor, you are welcome, and colleagues, you are welcome. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Thank you very much. Borrowing from Dr. Mainza's words, we are here to be lectured, so please join me in welcoming Professor Stefan Dercon to the stage.
Well, okay, thank you. Well, thank you to the IGC, thank you to ZIPA, thank you to the Economic Association of Zambia. It's great to get a platform to talk and get a little bit worried. I feel a bit bad. I'm going to lecture to you, at you. Hopefully I can engage you. It is late in the day. Long day already has passed. So hopefully I can a bit inspire you, make you a little bit skeptical, make you a little bit annoyed with some of the things I said, so that basically we can have a bit of a discussion. So I just want to stimulate you and keep you going. So, so what I will talk about is development bargain. And of course, I've not been at all clear what this is. What is he talking about? That's not a concept. In fact, I made it up, okay? Not just for this talk, but I wrote a book basically where I used that term. And I want to actually already give you a quick of a sense of where we'll be going so that you don't get lost. And I will talk about Zambia in the second part. And I will try to sketch the framework a little bit comparatively, because what I've been writing about in recent time is comparing countries. What is it now that in the end, in recent times, quite a lot of countries make a lot of progress and other countries seems to staying behind. And for me, one of the things, the key aspects of it, why it is, Well, of course, you know, there's plenty of economists in the room. You have to do sensible economic policies. But the question is a bit like, well, why do not more countries do basically sensible economic policies? And it's that question, having kind of worked as a technical economist, but also working inside government and working with it, politics comes into it, or political economy comes into it. And the way I want to look at it, and that's why I want to show you the picture for a moment and explain to you, because you get already, hopefully, the essence of everything I'm talking about, is that in every society, and just think of your own, there are people, yeah, okay, some that are more powerful than others, more influential, more powerful. Okay, the kind of the group that's most influential, I call it elite. And by the way, many of you are part of my definition of elite, okay? It's not just the richest man in the country, but it's people that one way or another can have influence, have maybe some power, some decision-making power or whatever in a society. Groups. I'll define it a bit more. And somehow they have a choice. They can either keep it as it is, the status quo, because it tends to work very well for those people who are in relatively well-off positions, quite powerful. So they can keep the status quo. Or they can do something what we've seen through history a lot of countries doing. There's actually gambling for growth and development. Why do I say it's a gamble? Well, things don't always work out. Okay, I'll talk about a few countries where it doesn't always work out, even with the best of intentions. But where they consciously, and you see them pulling at the levers there of the stationary bandit there, they are pulling it and actually take a gamble that actually can get development as the kind of the payoff for the efforts, okay? And actually, one of the key things I want to talk about a bit is that, you know, if you want to get growth that is sustainable, that is sustained in a country, that you want to grow the pie, that is inclusive at some point or another, these people with power and influence have to be willing to take that gamble. And they have to be willing to actually be seriously committed to get the things in place in society to actually make that progress, because they can stop it. That's the main thing. It's not because I like people that are powerful and influential, but they have the power to stop it, to keep the status quo. And so that's what I want to talk a bit more about it, and I want to take this to Zambia as well in a moment. So let me talk through it, and hopefully you get a bit of a flavor already of, now it's going to be the interesting moment. Do I manage to get this to move? Where does it move? Ah, got it. Good. Let me get a bit of facts very quickly. Oh, I need to... Oh, this was magic. Where am I pointing to? Onto the screen? Is the screen the connector? Huh? I need to point to that side. No. That's not quite what I meant to do. Pointing too much. No, they're controlling. Okay, let me start talking a bit about the facts when you sort out the screen. I'll tell you first of all something, you know. We're going over the last couple of decades am I doing this? Yes, I'm doing this. Great, I'm doing this. So in the last few decades, I was doing this. I may be doing this again. Full screen. Yes, I'm doing this. Excellent. I'm in control now. Thank you. In the last few decades, since 1990, you know, it's one of these most remarkable things. 2/3 of the extreme poor in the world, it's gone down. You know, it's gone down from something like more than, you know, something like 1.8 billion, 1.7 billion people in the world living in extreme poverty, according to the World Bank definition. It's one way of doing it, but it's a comparable way. It's gone down to about, you know, 750 million people. It was down by 2017. Okay, COVID's delayed a little bit what is happening, but we're still probably already around that kind of number, maybe even a bit lower by now, okay? That's 2/3 gone down. You know, it was first a bit in East Asia. We all know it happened a lot in China. That's the red on the picture, but it was quite a bit in Indonesia as well. Was then in South Asia, quite a lot in India, but also places like Bangladesh, where poverty went down a lot. And then the dark blue there is sub-Saharan Africa. But actually, usually say, oh, well, Africa stayed behind. No, a lot of Africa stayed behind. But Africa is not a country. There were at least 2 countries, Ghana and Ethiopia, that actually halved the number of extreme poor people in that country. Okay? In a lot of other countries, like the DRC, or Nigeria, Madagascar, Malawi, they doubled the number of extreme poor people. Okay? So that's the first thing. There's already different things happening across the world, and it's not just Africa versus the rest. There are some examples of other things as well. It's all linked to growth. You know, there's no country that in this period sustainably reduced poverty without having substantial growth as well. Growth is necessary, and the extent of it translates in poverty reduction. Yeah, it's not sufficient in itself. Some things need to happen. But there's these countries, you know, if you look at the world, lower middle income countries, on average, the per capita growth since 1990 was 3.9. So that means every 17 years, GDP per capita doubled. For low income countries, it was 2.9. That makes it about every 24 years that GDP per capita doubled. But it's been good times. Of course, some were more better than others. You had the Nigeria that did a bit and then stagnated in the 2010s. But you see there Bangladesh, Ethiopia, India as well, Ghana, doing this kind of thing. So I call this, and you can see that there, the kind of winners, they're well above that mean. And then you get the kind of losers, the ones that stay kind of behind. 2% in Nigeria, Pakistan, 2% per capita growth per year. I only do per capita because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. You know, population growth is a bit different. Let's look at per capita. Sierra Leone essentially stagnant, and the DRC even going downhill. In fact, the DRC per capita GDP is now still only about half of what it was, maybe about half of what it was at the time of independence. You know, takes effort. But basically, we got that. And so I call these the losers. Somehow in this game, because it's quite a good period, you know, a period in history where lower income countries, lower middle income countries have that kind of growth rate. Okay? So where do we have Zambia? Okay? Well, you know, well, you may want to forget sometimes, this is a country where extreme poverty almost trebled in the numbers. Almost trebles. Close to a record, by the way, in Africa. Almost trebled. And growth, pretty losing game here. Since 1990, and if you now look at the curve, that's the period just before 1992 when it was at its worst, and it actually has grown quite steadily until 2010, but the average growth rate is only 1.2%. Of course, per capita, it's all per capita terms. The last 10 years, 0, okay? Quite something, okay? Quite something to achieve that, okay? So the nature and the extent to which Zambia stayed behind, let's not underestimate it, okay? It's nice to sit in a nice room like this. Let's not underestimate how underperformed it has, okay? So how do you understand these differences? Okay, so I know I was going to do it, want to challenge you a bit. Just get easy for ourselves, and that's what I will do, because actually one of the problems is, I look at the details of these countries, these relatively successful countries, they're not all looking the same, you know. They didn't simply take the blueprint that our friends at the IMF gave and they did exactly that. They did actually, you know, reasonable things, but not necessarily the blueprint. They didn't do the blueprint that somehow, you know, I don't know, some academic would have given and never followed it. Actually, they did quite a lot of different things. But the important thing is also that these countries are quite different from each other. These countries are, you know, these winning countries, Indonesia, China, Bangladesh, Ghana, Ethiopia, it's not so straightforward to say, well, what do they have in common? Or, in fact, these losers like Sierra Leone, Malawi, Zambia, Nigeria, DRC, you know, some have natural resources, others don't. It's not as simple as, oh, well, it's something there, a simple curse story or something like that. So, in the book, I want to take for granted that, yes, of course, the world is a bad place, okay? The world is not being kind to Africa, okay? globally, historically, lots of bad things. The global system, as Joe Stiglitz, former chief economist of the World Bank, likes to also say, it's totally biased against developing countries. But it's not enough to tell a story like this, because you have countries that, despite the world being biased, did actually pretty well in this period, and others didn't. So it doesn't help enough to actually blame something global. Global prices, global stuff. It's not as simple as that, okay? Because, you know, huge difference between the countries. It's also a bit too simple. While, you know, history matters, of course. And I would be the first one to say institutional development, linked also to historical forces, are important, you know, and some of you may have ever read, some point read a book, Why Nations Fail, Mungule Robinson, you may have heard of it, Institutions Matter. Now, it's a great book, and it's a troublesome book for me as well. The whole book is basically about institutions matter, and there's no one here in the room who will say institutions doesn't matter. I say it all the time. The problem a little bit is that institutions, in the way they frame it, have been shaped through history. Okay? Institutions have been shaped through history. It created for me a bit of a problem. I was a chief economist at DFID, and I would come to countries like Zambia or Nigeria and say, yes, you're in trouble and your institutions are no good. And then actually, yeah, I know, my best advice is, since institutions are shaped historically, why don't you get yourself a better history? It's not so useful if you come from the United Kingdom and tell a country, get yourself a better history. Okay, so you can't quite do that. But actually, economic historians, including someone like Leonard Wanshakon from Benin, based at Princeton, he eloquently talks about and says, look, history matters to explain, but it doesn't explain all the differences. It doesn't explain the difference between Ghana and Nigeria. It doesn't explain why Zambia looks in the way it does relative to, say, Kenya or Tanzania these days. Okay, why is it? It doesn't easily explain it. Or put it differently, he says, 50% is history, but 50% is something else. It's about the actions and behaviors of those who have the power to change things. Yeah? And so that actually quite a few of these successful places, you know, Ghana, this is in the Mowgli Robinson sense. Indonesia, Bangladesh, you know, they have all their issues with occasional issues of rule of law, sometimes today in Bangladesh, undermining of democracy, corruption, they have all these things. Institutions are, it's just that institutional stuff that's really great in Bangladesh, in other places. It's too easy. It's too easy. I'm not trying to say it's a good thing, but it's too easy to simply say that's behind all the trouble. So the point is a bit like, it's not just institutions, this role of agents. We seem to have done the actions and behaviors that seem to be more seeing this. Okay? And so later on, I will suggest I'm an economist who market is the best way of allocating resources, but I have to admit that some places made quite a lot of progress being quite a state-led development model. In 1979 or India, that had to move away from the state-led development model to actually take off. So it's not so simple that it's all straightforward. But I should say immediately, some of the countries that were successful, they didn't do a developmental state like China or Korea. Bangladesh or Indonesia, one step on the court again, but to make the noise here, sorry. Bangladesh and Indonesia, they did actually much more market-based an economic model. So actually, again, the choices are not there. Same with the details of industrial policy, the flavor of the last few years, and in terms of economics, you know, what countries did was a huge variety of what they did as industrial policy. It's not as if there was a single recipe. So anyone who believes that there is a single recipe that explains what these countries did, it's probably not going to dare. But don't do stupid things is definitely something. You know, macroeconomic policies, you can't screw up the macroeconomy for too long, okay? Nigeria, when they had 7 exchange rates, that was a road to nowhere, okay? Reasonable things are still there. On exchange rate policy, you could say, well, we probably know that you shouldn't overvalue your exchange rate for too long, you know? There's plenty of countries who undervalued it for decent amounts of time, or competitive exchange rates, but there's limits. Pakistan, Nigeria definitely tells us macroeconomics, there's limits to that as well, what you can do. And in fact, if you look at some kind of sensible summary reports, people were saying, well, you know, successful countries typically kept an outward-oriented look. They also tried to see, could we actually break into non-natural resource exports? Indonesia, it was the central part away. Anyway, you know these things, but it's also not simply, if you have natural resources, you're doomed. People sometimes forget that Indonesia in its macroeconomic structure looked close to identical to Nigeria in terms of the importance of oil around 1975. 1975, Nigeria and Indonesia looked the same. Indonesia, growth, diversification, Nigeria, nothing, okay? So don't forget that it's not possible. Actually, a report by Michael Spence, Growth Commission, summarized some of these things about what is the sensible things to do. But then the question comes a bit like, why do countries not pick a sensible set and actually try to pursue systematically more growth-oriented, development-oriented policies? So why don't they do this? For me, when I was working as a chief economist of DFID, it was definitely brought home with consecutive visits somewhere about 10 years ago to the Prime Minister's office in Kinshasa to the left and the Prime Minister's office to the right of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a tricky state. There's no pictures of the Prime Minister's office anywhere on the internet. Okay, so it's not that I'm going to say there's perfection to these places. And DRC doesn't care less whether there's pictures or not there. But it was really interesting. I was invited, a bit like a visit like this, invited to actually talk to about their development plans with the team in the Prime Minister's office, the plans they want to do in terms of how to develop the country. So I go to the DRC together with some local staff from the embassy, Congolese staff, and we listened there to a whole morning of immaculately dressed young men, only men actually there, but not saying that was the problem, but was still noticeable. And they all talked economics. And they actually presented for each of the sectors a very detailed plan of the economy, you know, agribusiness, macroeconomic stuff, you know, education, health, infrastructure. And I must say, I sat there and thinking, this is actually pretty good. You know, they had good plans, and I thought, this is really smart, because, of course, they invited me thinking I had a checkbook. I was still working for the UK government. But at the same time, these were good things, and I thought, this is actually quite smart, because, you know, our friends in Washington will like this too. And at the same time, you know, it's theirs, they're presenting it here. And I remember walking out of that room together with the Congolese political advisor at the embassy, and he starts laughing. And he said, "Quel spectacle! What a show have we just witnessed." And I started laughing too, because I knew enough about the DRC that nothing, and literally nothing, was ever going to be implemented. And of course, nothing, and nothing has ever been implemented of this plan. So I go to Ethiopia, and they asked us, can you bring some experts in? A diverse group. And so came myself, Paul Collier, some of you will know him, was there, Lant Pritchard from Harvard, you know, talking about off-field thinkers, and then you get them together with Justin Lin from China, you know, quite a collection, okay? So these are diverse views, let's put it like this. And you get them in a room, and the Prime Minister's advisor sits there, the Deputy Prime Minister sits there, the Finance Minister, Governor of the Central Bank, and we have a retreat for a day and a half. They talk through their plans, and they ask us to comment. And we do this, and of course we all disagree, we're academics, you know, we will disagree about everything. But at the same time, we were worried, yes, they were clearly going to sail closely to the wind on the macro side. Tricky, bit of risk-taking. And in fact, a lot of what they were telling us was definitely not very kind of, call it, orthodox, and it wasn't anyone tempted to say it was heterodox, it was just non-orthodox, okay? It was unorthodox stuff. But we all, at the end, had a meeting together with just Elena, Paul Carluland, Pritchard, and myself. Actually, we all agreed they're going to try to do this. And you know what? They may well succeed in doing this. And actually, this was around 2012, 2013. They had the subsequent 8-9 years, really quite a remarkable transformation, fast growth, the fast in the country. Yes, the macroeconomy was a tricky thing, but they were going to do this, and they were going to actually change it. And in fact, if you look at the slightly longer period, 15 years of Ethiopia, I was a lot there. They changed quite a lot of the country. Yes, somehow, and I'll come back to this, by now, this is really under threat. Politics comes back into it. But in that period, they were going to do it. So what is the difference? So what is the difference between these two places? What is it that also worth thinking about in a country like this? And so it's helpful to go quickly, and I really have to go quickly, go briefly mentioning another Nobel Prize winner, Douglas North. Douglas North has this very nice starting paragraph of a really good book on violent social order. And it says, you know, every state formation in the end is a solution to violence. Solving the problem of violence. Those who've done a bit of sociology, Max Weber, you know, the monopoly of violence is the monopoly of the legitimate use of violence is one of these principles of a state. But he says, you know, how do states emerge? They emerge when violent groups do a deal with each other. Elite groups do a deal. They said, look, we'll keep it peaceful, but we're going to then have a deal about who has access to resources and who has access to activities, okay? So think of it, every state, it's helpful to think about it at its origins, and I will say up to today, as a rent-sharing deal. For those who actually control it, and how we're going to organize the state, and how we do it, okay? And so, this is the framework I use in the book. It's basically, I talk about the elite, but as I said, most of you are part of the elite here as well. People that, one way or another, somehow or another, are, in a very broader sense, have some power of influence. They're part of political class, maybe military, civil service, linked to businesses, some journalists, academics, religious leaders. This is the people I talk about. This is not about 3 people, although in Nigeria, I was doing a talk like this when former President Obasanjo was chairing it, and there was a presidential candidate in the room even, and a former governor of the central bank said in Nigeria, it's 34 people. And he was listing exactly the 34 people that you had to have on your side if you wanted to be president in Nigeria. Now, people were arguing and said, look, it's a bit more, it's a few thousand, whatever it is. But there's people, let's say, George Orwell was right, not everybody is as equal as everybody else, you know? Some are more equal than others, okay? There is an element of that. And it's what I think of, people with some influence, maybe concentric circles. But any state is a kind of a deal. It's a deal for some form of stability, and Zambia, an enormously successful keeping stability in the country, but it also is then a political deal linked to an economic deal as well. Who has access to resources and their distribution? And the way to think about it, of course, there's political systems. Sometimes you're in the dominant coalition, and sometimes you're out of it. But there is a dominant coalition at any moment in time that actually has, say, access to the resources, access to the state, access to things. And it's helpful. This is not a cynical view, this is a descriptive view. By the way, I used to work as an advisor in the Foreign Office in the UK until recently. You know, there are certain people with a WhatsApp number of the Foreign Secretary in my case, and others not. And they can get things fixed with that WhatsApp and others not. It's not as if suddenly you're bad, this is a strange country, developing countries are different. Go to the US. You have that there as well. Politics is all about the economic and the party financing and the election financing. It's all there. You know, let's not be too, this is not a cynical view. This is somewhere or another, these things are there. And you could have lots of elite bargains, of course, deals. You could have a bit like what I remember from Kabila's DRC and Mobutu's DRC, could just be a kleptocracy. If I have access to the state, I have a license to steal. I could tell you too many stories about it, because Mobutu had this amazing eloquence and he had these great lines. So like one of them was that he at some point was speaking to the civil service and said, look, I hear that people are complaining that you're corrupt. I understand, I know what's happening. But can I ask you, if you have to steal, could you just steal a little and leave something for the next one? and that was his public address to the civil service, okay? You have to have guts and confidence in the way your state can be run. I don't think your president, even if I'm not at all suggesting he would want to, but even if he wanted to, that's not somehow, this is not your system. This is not your state I'm describing, okay? This is not it. You could have oligarchies around wealth, power, identity, religion. You could have all kinds of things. I think, a lot of states in the world have elements of patronage. The deals are about patronage, often with, and I'm going to explain a term, clientelist tendencies. Often political scientists would describe a lot of African politics and also South Asian politics as competitive clientelism. And what does it mean? People compete to get power, but once you have power, you have to actually reward those who help you to be in power by jobs, contracts, and benefits. Civil service jobs, special benefits, several stuff. And contracts. I supported you, you need to pay back some. I should have your WhatsApp number, and if I ask it, you should help me. You can go in a quite an extreme way, but this is it. Okay, I think Zambia has these tendencies. Actually, by the way, democracies have an element always a bit into it. You need to deliver for your constituents. And in your constituents, you may want to pick which ones are more important to have on site. And you may want to pick certain things and whatever. So I'm describing, I'm not judging, okay? This is not a judgment. But competitive clientelism with patronage behind it is definitely something you can have. And of course, it could be with ideology, religion. Don't have that much here somehow. Some countries, it becomes the big narrative, and they behave as if it's something else than actually these kind of things. So a lot of states have this. So how do you get development if that's the underlying, if the state is a rent-sharing deal and you have to do clientelist tendencies? How do you get development? Actually, by the way, Ghana is like that. So why did it manage to get development and growth going? So why is it that some of these places are different from other places? And I think the more I look at it and the more I look at the examples, is that actually somehow or another, one way or in at a moment in history, you can time it. 1979 in China, from a communist party that actually was all driven by ideology, to a communist party that wanted to actually get legitimacy from its population to growth and development. Suddenly the party was a full commitment towards growth and development. 79 in China. So from ideology to pragmatism, doesn't matter whether the cat is white or black as long as it catches mice. It's basically, you have this shift. In Bangladesh, probably in the 1980s, from a failed period in the 1970s, somehow or another, different people in the elite said, we have to actually behave, act, do things a bit differently, work together. And for example, in politics there, despite the fact they had a turbulent 1970s and the two parties essentially murdered each other's leaders, or something to that effect, the two families in charge are still having a history of their own leaders to be murdered during political violence. Suddenly you got in a democratic system, certain things around the economy were not anymore disputed too much. Certain things, you didn't make it the area of politics because no, we need to grow this economy. And it became something self-fulfilling. I'm going to really struggle with time. I'm going to speak a bit faster. But anyway, any successful country that nation that has growth and that development tends to have at some point or another, across big players, influential players, not just the coalition in power, sometimes also broader. In Ghana, the finance minister told me, it also is important that the opposition person around finance for the finance job, the shadow finance secretary or finance minister, should also be buying in, broadly speaking, to at least a few of the things. Yeah? And so they somehow find some of these things. Could be out of a deep national commitment. Getting a bit old, I think this often not easily. People have a lot of self-interest and just an appeal to national commitment is not quite it. Often it's about legitimacy. Often it happens during crisis moments, also conflictual moments when things are going bad. Wow, we may lose power. That's actually the China story. The Cultural Revolution was really undermining the Chinese Communist Party. Dogmatic economic policy ruined the economy. By the late 1970s, they were nowhere. Actually, they needed to seek legitimacy again. In fact, Deng Xiaoping has writings that said, look, we need to prove to the population that we have the right to govern them through development, through growth and food security, as they put it particularly. Of course, why don't they do growth? Because the rents get bigger. And then it comes back to the things I alluded to in the very beginning. Why do they not just do it? Because elite players, those with power and influence in business, in politics, they understand the status quo. And throughout history, we've seen that growth and development disrupts. You get new elites emerging. You get new people that also want to have another type of jobs that only were captured by elite players. It gets changed. Government, but after 2005, really wanted the objective to do, otherwise we'll be legitimate growth in Ethiopia. It was Meles Zenawi, basically, if you read writings, and my God, did he push it through. It's like a arm, it's democratic zeal, he also wants legitimacy development. In the Congo, couldn't care less. To be honest, they couldn't care less. So if you look across countries, and I don't have the time to give you enough of the detail, that's actually in a book also I talk about many of these countries. How to actually get this? And very quickly, two things. And I'll briefly talk to you about Zambia. You will give me a bit more time because I will talk about Zambia, isn't it? But to use this framework, and one of the striking things is the first two, the shared commitment. It's not about the president giving a speech and say, from now on, this nation is committed to growth and development. I'm sorry, it's not going to work. It's going to be about actions and behavior. It's going to be about serious and credible politics to keep stability. By the way, Zambia does that quite well. Stability is not the big issue. I'm not talking macroeconomic stability, I'm meaning political stability and so on. A self-aware state is another part. You say, what is this now? Well, look, we can't all be like Korea and Japan or China, where you have a couple of thousand years of history of a meritocratic civil service, of centralized taxation, of state formation over several thousands of years. No, you can't have that. And in fact, a lot of the state here, definitely at the lower levels, in a country like Zambia, I come from Belgium. In a country like Belgium, is built up, lower levels is a lot of favors. It's clientelism. I get a job because I knew someone. I get a job, I get a contract because I know someone. You know, if that's your state, you have to be self-aware that this whole dream of developmental state and implementing from above is going to go and backfire. You need to understand, what can I do? That was the great thing in Bangladesh. They realized they had built up a state that couldn't quite deliver. And so you got in the 1980s a remarkable thing. They withdrew from certain health services. Really? Yes, they did. Because they knew they had an enormously effective NGO called BRAC that started providing two-thirds of the community health workers meant more health workers from an NGO than from the state. Think of a state that allows this to happen. You need to be really consciously saying, I need to be aware I can't do it, but I know that I can try to work with others to actually get it developed. I'm not saying solution, but it's self-awareness. Bangladesh did less as a state, and it became successful in development. It's really important. It was self-aware what it could do. So you need to know what you want. And this is the difference between these countries, you know. If you have a meritocratic state versus a clientelist state, It's very striking that Indonesia and Bangladesh did far more through the market and far more did to do civil society than Korea and China did. Well, they had a very different state. If I had to do state-run development, and if I pick my state to do it, I would have picked Korea or in the early days, or indeed China. You know, long history of strong state formation. That's the one I would play with. I don't think I would pick Belgium or Zambia, to be honest, to do this. Anyway, and so this is where, you know, countries across Africa, interestingly, Ethiopia and Rwanda, have all kinds of historical reasons much closer to this. No wonder that they actually could do certain things, and a lot of others didn't too. Anyway, so these are the kind of things with the final thing, never do dogma. Pragmatism, pragmatism, pragmatism. Learn, be accountable, either more internal accountability, like the Chinese state did, internally, if you didn't deliver, but you need a pretty good meritocratic state to do this. So you need external accountability frameworks. You know, for those who dream of an autocratic state as the only way to do development, let me tell you this. On average, autocratic and democratic states perform average good. Democratic states perform equally good as autocratic. There's only one little problem. The variance amongst autocratic states is some of the worst ones are autocratic states as well. And that's the problem with autocratic states. You can't quite pick which of the two you'll have. So if you just dream of just a strong hand, just the evidence doesn't necessarily help you here. Anyway, where's Zambia? Is it this kind of lion, a bit like the equivalent of the tigers of Asia? You know, can it be a tiger? Can it be a lion here? So I'm afraid if I have to pick an animal, it's a hippo. There's lots of places a hippo, okay? Please don't be offended. I like hippos, I like animals. But it's a bit of a hippo, I'll explain to this. First, we need to think again about what is this elite bargain here. Remember, this is the definition, and this is, look at the groups with power and influence in politics, business, military. And it's about who has the power of control. The democratic system means that some always are in the coalition, but some will be out, someone will be in. Okay? I think that's the kind of thing to think about it. So what is that coalition and what does the deal look like? So, and international players, I will refer to it a little bit, what role do they play in it? Unfortunately, they play a bit of a role here as well. Neighborhood in other places as well. So this is not picking on you. Things to get things done, it's a mix between the informal, formal, better know someone than not, you know. There's certain things that play a role there. And business interests and politics are mixed, you know, we can't deny it, you know. There's certain people with connections in business. If you want to get elected, you keep close links with it, including civil servants who have interests in business and so on. It's the way it is. It's the way the state is built up. It's not a judgment. This is what you play with. That's what you can work with. So it's a bit like the hippo, because it actually, the problem is you can only see the hippo's ears. In the water in the lake, you see the ears. You see, oh, that looks like all quite decent, but you don't quite know what's behind this. Why is this? Why is it so hard to reform fertilizer here? I'm not sure. It's a bit murky there, isn't it? Why is it so hard to get subsidies changed? It's a bit murky. It's not a technical issue. Why is it so difficult to do certain things than others? So there's a bit of the hippo. It's underwater. You see the hippo's ears, but you don't see the rest really. It's also a big animal, surprisingly big, and it's one of these things, it's a bit like a floating hippo. It's pretty stable in the water, seems benign, but you know, it's the mammal that kills most people in Africa, so, you know, it's not necessarily good for your state, okay? I'm not sure, what is it? Why is it floating in that way and whatever? This is why I say, this is a bit like the slight aimlessness of the whole setup. So let me quickly then finish with my diagnosis of the way out, okay? And I want to be constructive. One of the things I learned, I can't just depress you, okay? And I don't want to. There is ways out here. There's ways and steps that can be taken. But you have to be realistic. And I'll start first with the bad news, which is actually what I call the curse of medium copper. What is that? We all know the natural resource curse. But my argument will be, it shapes the way power works in this country. How the elite bargain shapes, and it becomes really hard because it imposes a bit of the structure. Let me explain my argument here. So one of the bad lucks you have is that you don't have enough copper, or you don't have enough natural resources. You're a natural resource dependent country with not enough natural resources. You're not Saudi Arabia, okay? If you had Saudi Arabia, anyone with a Saudi passport could be pretty well off. The problem is that if you were to add up what the government gets, for example, at the moment roughly in tax revenue, or the rents to the economy from natural resources, my understanding is it probably, the revenue for the government is less than 200, the rents to the economy may be, I was doing back of the envelope calculations, but it's a bit harder, maybe $400 per capita. If I had to divide it amongst everybody in society, that's all I have. That's as little as you have. You only have essentially in tax revenue $150 to distribute if you were to distribute it across the whole country. The slight problem we have, we have say 20 million people, 200 times 20 million. Who can calculate quickly for me? I think that's 4 billion. But 4 billion distributing amongst a smaller group of people, hooray, we're in business. If you have minimal, if you don't have enough natural resources, there are strong incentives for a smaller group to try to control what happens to these rents. They're not enough to go around. There's strong incentives to say, why would I be inclusive? Why should I try to make my economy, my society totally inclusive? It's pretty good for me. This is a pretty good status quo. Now, the problem really is there's too much copper to ignore and too little to get everybody rich. So, creates a massive status quo bias. If I'm the one who can control it, and which of my friends and those who bring me to power and those who have to reward, whether it's, ethnically, regionally, urban versus rural, those who keep me in power, I will do it. I will distribute amongst them just to keep the status quo. Because there's, it's worth protecting. 4 billion is worth protecting. Controlling 4 billion. So you do all you can to be in power and to actually be able to control this. The problem is there's a self-perpetuating nature to it. Because you can start doing politics based on this kind of distributive clientelism. You have resources to hand out. If I'm a politician in a clientelist or democratic system without natural resources, I have to work hard to earn them. Otherwise, I can't keep power. If I have natural resources, I don't have to work that hard. I can probably give some food subsidies, some fertilizer subsidies, can give some bits and pieces. I don't have to grow the economy. It doesn't matter that I distort it because the 4 billion is still there. As long as I keep the mines working, the 4 billion is there. See what I mean? It really sets bad incentives. It's nothing about pure economic ones, it's political economy, these incentives. It really sets incentives to change hard. Now, I want to keep power, and the problem is, wherever people are concentrated, they're noisy. So I better keep an eye on the urban areas. And so I built in urban bias, because I have to keep an eye on the urban bias because that's where they will complain. That's where the floating voters are. That's the ones that are clear seeing what's going on with my wealth. This country has such low population density, people in the rural areas dispersed. If you're dispersed, there's no organization. You don't really know what's happening. In the city, you know. So the political system has strong incentives to build in urban bias. So you end up doing a lot of urban bias. So you have the cities that economists say you should never have. Lusaka is the kind of city that historically people said, not the best idea to have, which we call a consumption city. Natural resource rents are built up to have a beautiful sprawling city, but the economic activity is quite limited. There's no Chinese city built after Deng Xiaoping that looks like Lusaka. In fact, Chinese cities look crowded, dizzy, busy. Yeah, because they've consciously tried to build production cities. They consciously were planning it because cities have to earn their keep. Lusaka doesn't have to earn its keep. The copper does it for it. And it can earn its keep. So you don't have production cities. You have basically well-off people and a services sector. And that's basically it. You don't have a productive city. But it all comes back from these same incentives that you don't have enough copper, but you have copper. Medium copper is a real curse in political economy terms. So you have incentives to keep food prices low. Another way of urban bias, because we need to keep the cities as they are. Okay, I started work as an agricultural economist. I started working on agricultural marketing board and agricultural markets in Tanzania. I can assure you, agricultural policies are screwed up in this country, especially in maize. Fundamentally, still 1980s stuff, and it's getting worse. Maybe, it was getting worse. You really want to be careful. All the things on maize, they don't make sense for food security. They're all a reflection of urban bias. It gets quieter in the room, very good. And basically, all these urban bias cements rural poverty. You know, all over the world, agricultural productivity tends to be lower than non-agricultural productivity. In fact, that's why we talk about economic transformation, structural transformation. That you get people to move from lower productivity activities to higher productivity, like manufacturing and maybe some services. No wonder, there's a gap. There's a typical agricultural productivity gap. In most countries in the world, on average, is between 4 and 8 times between the non-agricultural productivity and productivity, in low-income and lower-middle-income countries. In Zambia, it's about 20 times or more. The gap is incredible. I was trying to calculate our productivity of a worker. I don't think it's more than $100 here, dollars per capita, per worker. $100 per worker. Not good. Of course, no wonder you have 80% rural poverty and you have terribly low productivity, okay? It locks you into it. That's the cycle that needs to be broken because all the things that go wrong in inclusion, but I would say in growth as well, status quo just focusing on natural resources is not going to get you the growth. So how do you escape from how do you escape? The funny thing is the solution lies in the natural resources. So you want to escape from it, but you have to do it by the natural resources. So I'm not trying to say you should stop trying to do it well. So development success is to make natural resources a smaller share of GDP and making sure there's fewer people employed in agriculture. So if anyone is a journalist here, please don't write up that I encourage a smaller natural resource sector and I want to get people to be kicked out of agriculture. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about structural transformation. That would be success in this economy. So how you do this? Well, you need to reverse urban bias. And funnily enough, the same natural resources that built the wrong kind of urbanization is probably going to be the source of rents in due course that needs to build an alternative. We need to start building productive production centers. We need the expansion of the natural resources because we need resources. And I know that's government policy. But we don't say, oh, and then something with agriculture. Actually, the solution for agriculture is probably going to be urbanization. Oh gosh. The solution to it. And why is this? Because you need buyers that don't just want to buy maize, but much more of these incredibly high potential, lots of diversified things that this agriculture can produce. You need actually to promote agriculture production, you want productive urbanization. Natural resources into it. Now, I don't want neglect of agriculture. You want it as a supportive growth engine. It's not going to drive growth in this country. you want to be supportive. Think Indonesia, that's what they did. Sensible agricultural policies, agricultural growth was not the driver of everything, but it was there. It provides a source of diversification and inclusion, including through releasing labor into urban areas in due course. Urbanization. So the growth engine, separate what you do for inclusion in agriculture from what you do for growth. All the time I hear everything being mixed up. You do certain things for inclusion, and I'll come to that. You definitely do things for growth. Commercial agriculture, value change, export orientation, and I mentioned already sensible urbanization, secondary cities to have demand for the agricultural goods. The inclusion engine, don't stop mixing up production, growth, maize. All the things you do for maize get justified for inclusion. Well, then do some sensible inclusion policies and don't mess up the whole market, FISP or the Strategic Food Reserve. Okay, controversial enough, very good. And you look for inclusion through better social protection, health and education. You know, that's how you do inclusion for the most marginal smallholders. By the way, there will be smallholders that totally can commercialize as well. But not every farmer in every village will do that. You have to recognize that it's actually going to be quite heterogeneous how we do this. So how are we going to do this? And I'll come to the end of it. Oh my God, I'm running out of time. Sorry for all. It is my fault, not yours. So how to do this? How do we change this? It's tough, you know. It's really tough. There is certain noises, okay? And very careful not to get a particular title in the newspaper or whatever in terms of that I'm in favor or against what the current government is doing. But there is a sense that after a deep crisis, there is a stabilization program, you know, with the help of the friends of the IMF, you know, and working on it, stabilization, debt restructuring, all these things. But there's also a sense that by being a bit more pro-business, economic policies become a bit more like economic policies. A little bit more like an economist would think, you know, you want to encourage, do something. There's ambitions for change. Electoral cycles are looming. But I would say there is an appetite for change amongst key political leaders. I think for business as well. Of course, some businesses live from the status quo, and they will do all they can to avoid fertilizer reform and whatever, because that's their bread and butter. But there will be some in business community that actually are willing to gamble on growth and diversification and doing new things and moving capital into the right areas. Of course, there's massive challenges. Geopolitics, although I think that's a great opportunity. Most of the Asian countries I travel to, like Bangladesh or Cambodia, they are being so smart, and they, I'm not sure whether some of the Western donors here will step out of the room for a moment, close your ears. But you know, they're very smart in playing off China, the Gulf, things. Not by deep politics, but just whoever you deal with, you do a good deal, a long-term deal. Nothing else. Just a good deal, long-term deal, good business deal. And don't be tempted by some politics in the short run, some money flows that seem to be coming very quickly, even Emir signs it. No, just be careful with all that stuff. But do it things. You have to be a bit worried. The outside community likes and actually sometimes gets encouraged to try and test the donor model. We find champions, reformers. And I must say, I meet excellent technocrats here. They're not that many, but excellent ones, okay? But there's also certain things that they can't solve. That tells you, yep, once it comes to certain things, we suddenly, not anymore with the hippo's ears, but we are somewhere below in the belly of the hippo and God knows what's going on there. And we have no idea how to actually do it. Some of the agricultural reforms, energy stuff, not sure where it's going. So the problem with this model, just relying on the technocrats, the good ones, some in the room here, it's not sustainable. And let me now come to the final thing to actually say, where is the starting point? You know, the starting point has to be a recognition where we are. A status quo elite bargain, none of that perfect stuff that you have on the right. Where still quite a few people in politics in the status quo, and in politics and civil service and in business are focused on the status quo. Where the state is still not terribly self-aware, and the learning is really hard. There's some good pockets of excellence, but they're not quite there, okay? Relative to where we need to be, we're not quite there. So is Zambia here ready for a development bargain? I mean, there is an agenda, okay? And if done well, I could talk at greater length about saying this could really begin to work. Delivery focus, decentralization, pro-growth. But the question I want to have, and this is my last slide, how deep is the appetite for change? How much patience is there for actually doing a bit on the longer term? How much patience is there in political and business circles for policy continuity between regimes? This has to be for 10 years, 15 years. That's how the success was in successive governments in Bangladesh or Ghana. There was persistence of certain things. And of course, everything is too personalized. When I talk to people, well, it all depends on whether one person is still in the job at a high level or not. It's dependent on individual pockets of excellence. So, and of course, global circumstances and stabilization pressures don't help here. So what to do? And it's the last one. So the first thing is, be realistic what you can achieve. The incentives for the status quo are there, and understand why can't we get the needle to move on certain things, okay? Really understand why is it, and it's usually it's political economy. And then build coalitions for change across political views, between business, between civil society, that economic change can actually happen. For those who can, lead, communicate, inform, build coalitions, but do accountability. Really invest in accountability, including with civil society, and try to say, is actually the things they said they're going to deliver, is it happening at a local level and whatever? And then basically have a debate that actually is less all about the short term, the exact short term measure, but are we beginning to build a coherence, a longer term plan that is not doing the silly kind of policies that we often observe in lots of countries, but actually somehow more or less a broader consensus around some sensible macroeconomic policies, sensible growth policies, and things that can be sustainable. And I'm going to finish now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very insightful lecture. Please allow me to invite to the stage Professor Stefan Dercon and Mr. Shahrukh Wani and Mr. Zali, as well as Dr. Mainza, please, for the very brief fireside chat. And if there are any questions, please keep them, because we're going to go around with the mic for people to ask the questions. And if there are any questions for the people online, please feel free to drop them in the chat, as we will try to take as many as we can for not only the professor, but everyone else at the high table. Over to you, Shah.
Thank you so much, Benji. Everyone can hear me? Excited? Now let's talk a lot more about the hippo and the lion and all the animals. Thank you very much, Stefan, for your excellent, excellent talk. So now we're going to enter a really fun part of the afternoon. Really encourage people to ask questions, make comments. There's only one rule: be clear and concise as possible. You can intervene. There's no such thing as bad questions, only long questions. You can also make comments, but as long as you're clear and concise. So we're going to come to the audience in a couple of minutes. I'm going to just allow the discussants to give very short impressions of the talk. Zali, can I come to you first? Just in a minute, what are the three things at most which come out of Stefan's talk in the context of Zambia for you?
Thank you very much, Shahrukh. I think the first thing that comes to my mind now is about the issue of our dependence on the natural resource, copper. We have engaged in this discourse about transforming the structure of this economy by diversifying away from copper, allowing other productive activities in the economy to also grow. But I think that over the years we have failed lamentably. And this is because the economy is quite closely linked to copper in terms of its foreign exchange earnings. And any slight shift in terms of copper production, we see the impact in every aspect of the economy. Everything just begins to unhinge. So it is really very important that this has come to light, that the amount that we're getting there is not sufficient to go around and improve the well-being of everybody, bring them to a certain level of human development where we can really appreciate that the copper is doing something in the economy. It worked very well when the population of this country was still small, but the population keeps on growing. What then do we do? And also the issue of dependence on agriculture as an economy, where we do our agriculture to sustain the urban livelihoods, to sustain the urban populations that are engaged in low productivity activities, and then we are forced to try and reduce the cost of, or the price of the agricultural outputs that come into the urban areas, perpetuating poverty in the rural areas. And I think this is one area of reform that we need to I think, work concertedly and make sure that we move away from the current practice laid by the FISP programs and the other programs that are in the agricultural sector. We need a more commercialized approach to agriculture. And I think the issue of the unproductive cities like Lusaka doesn't help much, but I think that we still have options for reforming. But one other thing that I think is a bit of a thorn in this country is you see, the government is really an agent, is an agency of the people. The people are the principals. They elect a government in place and they expect a certain outturn in terms of policy direction. So if the government is not going to toe the line of expectation of the population become vocal and they threaten to remove that government. So that encourages short-termistic in terms of the way we plan our development programs in this country. So I think quickly those are the three things that I could mention.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zali. Nicholas, do you also want to add what your sort of big 2-3 things are, takeaways from Stefan's presentation?
Sure, thanks. I may have one or two, very brief. Just to ride on what he's mentioned again, because I had actually very similar. I had something on inconsistency in terms of the agricultural policies. I had something to do with, he talked very well on the political influence, the civil service influence, as well as, when you bring in all these academicians, kind of the influence that comes from the academics. Maybe mainly for me, I would ride on the dependence on copper. I think it's really it's high time. There's a time when you talk of the 90s and probably maybe the early 2000s when dependence on copper and other minerals was actually seemingly helping us in terms of boosting our economy as a country. But when you look at sustainability, it has not been well pronounced, because we seem to have been revolving around the same wheel, same point when it comes to dependence on copper. My point around copper would be that I think what I would want to see, or what we would want to see as a nation or as EAZ, probably is more of a value addition to these minerals that we have. What you see around is that we tend to be exporting too much, and because we are unable to keep the raw materials and then add any value. What we just get is that at the end of the day, we get exploited when it comes to accessibility to the products out of the raw materials that we export. On the inconsistencies to do with agriculture, he touched on a very cardinal point. For example, certain programs that, like the ones that he had beamed there. Yeah, I'm trying to be very diplomatic, probably maybe just because of where I'm coming from. I think it's high time that actually probably there's a program, for example, we need ED. We need to see more of, the transformation when it comes to, if only probably we had launched earlier the CASIP program. Yeah, that's what we need, to see the more of, transformation, more of the reforms around agriculture. That will help us. Of course, what we are always looking at is that we don't want to be preaching more of production. What we need to see is productivity. So in the CASIP, that's where you would see a lot of reforms which are trying to be, proclaimed that if we can do A, B, C, D. For example, allow me to make mention of one of the gaps that has been quite seriously pronounced, the agriculture or agribusiness financing. There's been a lot of a gap in there. So that's what we need to curb. If only we can provide such solutions, then we would actually improve in terms of productivity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I should have said, and I was asked to say this, but also to maintain some diplomatic capital, all opinions of Professor Stefan Dercon are his only. They're not IGC's, the London School of Economics, or our funders. So this is really interesting. And I want to come immediately to the audience, but I have one specific thing, which I would love if you can elaborate on. You talked about there are several actors, and one of the things, at least I've witnessed here in Zambia, and perhaps you have also the past couple of days, is that there is a lot of attention by international organizations, aid agencies, donors, multilaterals, in part because of the crisis, due to the debt crisis, but also due to geopolitics, the fact that there is some degree of sort of commitment to using greater research and advice and more reformist tendencies in the administration. But there are sort of all these examples over the past few decades of how aid can have perverse incentives. It can lead to mimicry of these plans, which you saw in DRC. What would your perhaps three things be to our friends in the audience who are from aid agency, international organizations, they should do to sort of do a slightly better job in supporting the reform? And then particularly if you can touch upon the role of the IMF program, because the IMF program, of course, a great sort of structural, and I know they're in the room, and Big Bird, but he has stepped out, so that's great. We can speak freely now. But there are examples like Indonesia and India, where the program was used as a credible sort of commitment by the local elite also to push through some reforms, because the IMF is telling you to do this, even if they're costly to certain constituencies. But there are also many examples of that not happening. So, any thoughts?
Yeah, so thank you. That's so advice on the the international organizations and so on. So, I mean, one thing, and I was part of that whole system, and I should just say myself as well, put me in it. And we've been doing this lark for the last 60 years. We've been acting in many ways. So I would now always say for any outside actor to actually think, are we learning enough from any of the previous periods? Are we generally having some institutional memory of how we engaged, what we did, how we acted? Because, I've been coming here over the years, but some of the things are still the same. Some of the programs seem to be the same solution to that was tried before, but there's very little institutional memory of this. Of course, having worked in government myself, it's something governments do also repeatedly, doing this. So there is a learning part of it, I would say. The second thing I would say quickly is there is a tendency to want to really everybody latch on to say, oh, there is this particular technocrat in that particular ministry. Let me be very careful not to name anyone. But there's somehow, this person, they are really good. And let's actually now work with them and whatever. And then they get so exposed well, they get flattered and they really enjoy it, but they get so exposed that the moment there is a moment, some kind of political spoiler will make sure this person is sacked. And so one of the games, and I was actually earlier with the IMF rep to actually say it would be quite an interesting study of how many ministers of finance tend to survive IMF programs in the world when they are well implemented. And so there is a certain strategic patience needed as well on the international community. There's some really good people and I won't say that about every civil service I meet, but there's some really good, committed people in the system. There's also in the political, I was going to almost say even in the political class, but in the political class, people that mean really well and want to do things. So you have them, but you know, they're surrounded also by people for whom the status quo is very much in their interest, for their personal interest, or just this is how we know how to do it. So we want to work very carefully with some of these kind of people, and that's because, you know, a good technocrat, you hope they will still be in post in 10 years. And so so keep an eye on that and think through it. And maybe the third one is, maybe it's slightly the opposite to what we're saying. Windows of opportunities don't come often. The one thing with entirely donor community is that, and maybe people like me are not helpful, being a little bit critical, a bit sensible, but, you know, I would say, since I'm talking personal name, relatively speaking, I'm sure they all agree with me, relatively speaking, we're probably in a better moment than maybe some years back, where things can change, where things opportunity are resetting the economy and doing things. So relatively speaking, we probably are in a better place. The international community is always skeptical, but it also wants to be, you know, doing things in a particular way for a long term in a lot of places. I'll give you an example, and it's nothing to do with Zambia. Just before COVID, in the 2 years before, you know, the biggest IDA recipients from the World Bank were Pakistan, Nigeria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. At least two of them I've mentioned, and the third I could have mentioned amongst the losing parties. Places where there was no political commitment to any serious economic reform, but they got the most aid. There were a bunch of countries who were trying to do something, Ethiopia at the time still, you know, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, and probably a few others, and they all went to, and Ghana, and they all went to the Eurobond market. And we are talking with them about restructuring their debt. So when there is a moment to do the right thing, we're not there, and we still think, well, maybe let's wait, and so on. So, you know, there needs to be a willingness also in the international community to take some gambles, you know. International community in this game, we better gamble once in a while on reforms, on change, on processes. And, you know, I'm tempted to say there's probably more chance today for some success, dare I say, than in closer to an election or indeed some dates in the past. Well, do we show it enough that we do this? And that's probably it. And it probably applies to IMF as well. You know, IMF could also think a bit more politically and knowing its moments. And when you're harsher, when you're less harsh, when you burn a finance minister, when you don't burn them. And so that's basically maybe the same advice.
Wonderful. So I want to open this up to the audience. We have some online questions coming in, but I want to give precedence to people in the room. If you have a question, raise your hand. Rory, can you perhaps start there? Please ask. This is your opportunity. You can ask as difficult questions as you can possibly come up with.
All right, okay.
Can you
Thanks.
introduce yourself briefly?
My name is Richard Kampamba. I work with Oxfam. Okay, so thanks for the presentation. I just have two questions. The first question is, I think you talked about us as a country, as Zambia, to start thinking of urbanization. But I would just want you to stress a bit more on how we go about this urbanization, and also what should be able to drive this urbanization. And then the second question is, I think I agree with you when you talked about the elite bargain. I think these people are everywhere and they are very critical in any economic system. But I just wanted to find out, I think, maybe to ask, to get your perception about the issue of balancing this edit, bargain, and addressing socio-economic inequalities, even as we pursue economic growth.
Very good. Corey, go there first and then merge them.
Thank you for that presentation, Nazir Pando Zipa. Thank you for, the presentation was brutally honest, which is great. Since we're having a candid conversation, obviously another point to raise is a developing country like ours, but necessarily not allowed to do certain things that the developed countries have done, nuclear power, things of that nature that have brought developed countries to where they are today due to climate change and all these other things. But my question is more around what role does population play in all of this? The countries that you benchmark us with have a very big population and have undergone through a lot of political change, but a lot of industrialization because they have the people, they have the human capital. It's like a country like ours who's maybe 1.3 meters, playing in a basketball game full of 2-meter tall people. You're benchmarking us against huge economies. Maybe only those who can be at par with us is maybe Rwanda, 13 million, I believe, but the rest of them, Kenya, Tanzania, they're all well above 50. So does your path that you suggest here that we do, albeit making a lot of sense, does it still have the same road with a population such as ours, or should we concentrate more on being more realistic towards what we can actually develop in a small population to try and get to another definition of what development is, rather than benchmarking to a development that can't be achieved because of our population size? Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So,
Shall I take these or more?
yeah. So,
Okay, so this is great. Excellent questions. On the urbanization, you know, forgive me that I'm not going to give you a very long answer. In fact, IGC will have also some good work on it. But it's the simple point, you know. How do you think about urban planning? Where do you locate? How do you connect productive opportunities in your urban planning to where population is? You know, the nicest areas should not simply be residential houses, but it's about density as well. A sprawling city is much more expensive for good economic activity than that it's more dense. And so there's quite a lot of written about it. Natural resources by nature, because you don't have to get economic activity to get your city to grow. You know, you just, well, I was going to use an unkind word. Okay, it's a mixture of official public investment and probably quite a bit of laundering as well that puts it all into construction. But there's no need to earn that money, okay? And so it's actually trying to think of urban centers that are connected to certain, you know, have connectivity to particular rural settings, to, you know, it's an urban planning thing where you try to optimize the externalities you get from a population that is close to each other, yeah? We could talk more about it. There's some good examples. I can't help it to tell you a story that I had in China. I was actually, we were doing some work, actually it was with the IGC at the time, to actually doing some work, and the Chinese partners had said, so what we wanted to do is to work with them together in Africa on two themes, urbanization and industrialization. And the Chinese think tank, they said, oh great, it was a state-run, very close to the government, said great, great. So we put in a proposal about urbanization, and we put in a proposal about industrialization. And we got there, and the person, normally they're so diplomatic, and said, this is absolutely rubbish. It was terrible, because urbanization and industrialization are two sides of the same coin. Okay, and so they were very surprised when we then told them, like even Chinese projects here, the industrial parks were typically built on average 7 times as far from the urban centers than they were built in China from the urban centers. They say, oh, that's totally wrong. They all need to be connected because we did industrialization as part of urbanization, or we did urbanization as part of industrialization. The idea of productive cities, you get the intuition, sorry. Something then, the important point about the balance and how to deal with it. So, look, and I'm glad at least you say, look, you recognize that these people with power, you know, unfortunately, I will say, as a, maybe as a former Marxist, so to speak, as a former Marxist, I say we'll have to take them along the road, unfortunately, you know, but we'll have to have them because they have the power to the status quo, okay? And so you kind of recognize that, and I think that's important. It's not because I like them, but the point is you've well made, and where do ordinary people fit into it that are staying behind? Now, one of the good things that most evidence tells us, that when a country starts growing, and most of the time then it can't just do it from natural resources, there's very few Saudi Arabias around, they have to grow from productive activities, so they need people to be involved, and actually you get almost implicitly pressures on more inclusion. You know, if you look at all the Asian economies, think even what's been happening in India now, they probably lost the election probably because there was not enough inclusion. The growth was fast, there was not enough inclusion. It all becomes part and parcel of progress. If you want to sustain progress, you'll need to do some inclusion. Now, I don't want to just rely on it. In a natural resource-rich economy, you want to make sure that you early on do distributive measures in health, education, social protection, and use these resources for it. But also people are there, and this is a bit like where this really, come back to the population point in a moment, is incredibly low population density. Makes it really hard for people to put pressure on elite players, and it only happens in the urban areas, which is then, of course, it's quite urbanized here, but there's a lot of the poorest people, there's no way of seeking legitimacy from their leaders. Do you see what I mean? Democracy and voting is not enough. You need to have more pressures there. So they need to be fitting in, and how to deal with it, you guys, you mobilize them, you make them aware, you build the connectivity, built in internal accountability processes, civil society, and so on. It's a crucial role. That's what happened in a lot of other countries as well, so you need to do it. Yeah, I take your point on that, the first point that say, look, there's still certain things you can't do. And I will take it entirely. There's still quite a lot of things that you can do, that they're not blocking you, and that other countries took advantage. But let's not make a debate on that, but because you're right, nuclear power and so on, you can't do it. But the population one is a really interesting one. The low population density of Zambia is a problem. And it does also mean that some kind of certain ways of development, like in India, where tiny villages became little cities, because you started from high population density. You know, if you go to a village, I've been studying same villages that have been studied since the 1970s, they were rural villages. And I go there and say, for me, that's actually a little town. In Africa, it would be a little town, because the population density is so high. Low population density hinders. This is why I point out urbanization is your only route. You know, it's the only way, because the low population density cannot really get high productivity for an awful lot of people in agriculture. It's going to be very hard to do that. I take your point. Not going to be Singapore. You're a landlocked country, and we've been spending time also talking to people and say, well, where will the growth engines be from? You know, yes, I'm saying that you should lower the expectation, but you won't be Singapore. You know, you won't be Singapore. Rwanda it would help actually Rwanda a little bit, not trying to be Singapore or Switzerland too quickly. You know, that there is something there, but you can do better. A couple of percentage per capita growth higher, do this for 10 years, 2-3% more per capita growth. It should not be too difficult, but it's not about 15% growth rates and so on. In fact, when you look in India, the geographical spread of some of these growth rates are also quite different. In Bangladesh, there are places where the growth is much less than in other places. So you will have that. But yeah, a bit of realism. But don't forget density is important. That's why urbanization is so crucial.
Excellent. Let's go there and then to the lady at the back. And Mopala will come next.
Good afternoon. My name is Valerie Chandachwe. I'm a member of the Economics Association of Zambia and studying and working, but I won't mention where. Okay, so yes, I get your point, and I've read why nations fail and so on, and the issue about institutions and development. And what's interesting for me is the fact that you also mentioned about national planning processes and how they are not delivering. And I guess it's because nations have to be self-aware. In this self-aware component, I think our technocrats will need some form of tools to be able to do that analysis. And I know there's the political economy analysis framework, which we don't use at all, because then we're using other frameworks like national planning frameworks. So yes, I get your argument, but then how do we, from what you have shared, have a framework to do our national planning that speaks to self-awareness and interrogates all these things about urban bias and so on and so forth? Because I think we're stuck in national planning processes and also linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's like a dilemma for me. Thank you.
Here at the front.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Stefan. That was a fantastic presentation. I think it gives quite a good in terms of the political economy, right? So I've got just the first one is quite a quick one. In terms of how you define development, I think you're using per capita, right? But could that be then a flawed perspective given the inequality that we face in most of these African countries? And Zambia as a case study for that. Then the second one I thought that was very interesting was this idea around the elite bargain. That's a fantastic perspective, I think. But how do you then factor that in terms of the global elite bargain, that bargain? Are they choosing the winners and the losers, right? I think I want you to give a chat around that. The last one is around your analysis on the, so you talk about the case of the medium copper, which I think is an interesting conversation to have as well. But then you use tax, and then I think you then factor in per capita, so you say about $200, right? But I think I did a quick, I Googled quickly when you're presenting it, I saw Zambia exported in raw form 6.6 billion worth of the copper. So is using the taxation, the tax, how much we gain from taxation, a right perspective? Or is it going back into the actual worth of how much we're exporting? Because that, with your conversation, it brings in, do we have the right taxation regimes and things like that? But fantastic presentation, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the excellent, I'm going to add, Stefan, can I add stuff?
Oh, I'll take it, yes.
Can I add a couple, yeah. So one from an online question, slightly long, but bear with me. So what role does education, mindset change, and democracy play in this interplay? I ask this because, these are not my words, I really want to stress this. I ask this because in Zambia, we seem to have a consumption-oriented population that somehow believes the government needs to provide everything for them. And this makes it hard for the government to effect reforms. Whenever that is tried, the population will rebel, and the government always tries to please the population to stay in power. So sort of going into the sort of short-term cost when you think about the long-term political horizon, and if you are a politician with an election coming soon, what would you do? So what would you do, Stefan?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, and it comes down to, it's a bit like, you know, what I had there also described as this, the risk of persistence in this kind of clientelist mindset, because you know the state tries to portray itself to the population. I'll be the patron, and you're the client, and I will provide for you if you give me your support. And as I said, you know, democracy has a tendency to build that in, but it can sometimes go very far. And this kind of mindset the state should provide. You know, look, in the UK we're going through an election. The mindset is there as well, that for, especially for people who are not well off, there's a lot of sense the state should provide for me for everything. So how do you overcome this? It's very hard, first of all, and it's basically any politician you ever meet finds, you know, knows that the short term, you know, when I was advising the Foreign Secretary in the UK, I had the sense that our horizon was about 12 hours. That's the planning horizon of the foreign ministry in the UK, because, you know, stuff happens all the time, and you do it. So how do you do this? So there's the first thing is in the expectation of the population. You know, you don't really need in any country commanders-in-chief, but you need communicators-in-chief. You need people who can actually communicate. And then the second thing you need, not commanders-in-chief, but brokers-in-chief, who can actually broker between people who have voice, who form opinion, to actually have a certain set of things to get some agreement about. You know, any intellectual here in the room, which all of you are, you know, maybe some of us are better spoken than others, but, you know, if we wanted to, the more I worked in the government, the more I thought, you know, yeah, Machiavelli was onto something, you know, you can, it's not so hard to manipulate people and to spin things and to provide it. It's not so hard to be a journalist that just wants to oppose to something. So it's about coalition building. For ordinary people, it's to ask an awful lot. But it is actually, I do think it is somehow about, so it's education, yes, but it's actually of people who can be more sensible, to be more common sensible and saying, look, let's not fight over this. You know, there's enough we can fight over in politics and get the upper hand. And so, yeah, there's a certain amount of things. So I would say, you know, brokering these coalitions between people who can and also communicate a bit more sensibly around it, that's probably the only route I can see to do it. Because, yeah, poorer people especially, not well-educated people, they will ask for that. And let's see rich economies and poor economies. I mean, come on, think of Trump, you know, whatever, what he appeals to. You know, it's the kind of things there. Okay, your question. I did a quick calculation. That's $330 per capita. Okay, that's still not very much. I still call that medium. You know, isn't it? $6 billion divided by 20 million people, roughly. It's just over $300. Okay, so I know that because I was just told that the government gets about $150 at the moment. So it's about 45% of the 330 is what the government gets in tax revenues on average from all the things. So yeah, we're there. I would still call this medium, you know. $330 is not getting us very far. You know, yesterday someone said, what if we get to 2,000? You know, if you want to be Thailand at least, you know, we're sitting there at 6,000, 7,000, you know. It's still Indonesia, several thousand, 4,000, 5,000, whatever it is these days, you know. It can only be the engine, the starting point. So for all the people that said, you know, the natural resources, in fact, you made the earlier comment, and I don't think you meant it like that, but the point, the natural resources are there. Let's efficiently exploit them. We can do more, you know, I don't mind some cobalt, but don't think your job is done if you do the mining well. That's the kind of thing. And I think too often the revenue came in, it was then badly spent. There was no attempt to make linkages in these urban areas around the copper belt and so on. That economy wasn't developed, and that's what I'm talking about. So yeah, so $330, even if you grab it all, I still say it's not that much. But anyway, we could disagree. The global elite bargain, a very good point. Do they make the winners and the losers? So I mentioned, and I do want to say, let's not say they don't play a role, you know? I mean, the world is a wicked place, and there is a lot of injustice in the global international system. Joe Stiglitz, you know, former advisor to Bill Clinton, but he writes a book all the time about the globalization is not really, it is biased. Globalization is biased. Let's not worry about it. So they play a role. There's still, first of all, you know, and in the natural resources and in the mining, they definitely play a role. Okay? And you know, there's economies of scale. It's very not straightforward, everybody to do it and whatever. So, yeah, I sometimes say, you know, when I was in Sierra Leone, so let me now polite, if I was in Sierra Leone and they were complaining about the mining investors, I said, look, you get the mining companies you deserve. Because your whole system of your local elite was doing endless deals with the players from there. So there is always a local elite. In the DRC, there's a local elite that does the deals with international companies. So if you want a good company, it's also the discipline of those who do the deals on this side. And so it's important. And at times you haven't had the best deals, let me put it like this. And they play it as well, so yeah. But I take your point. I spent some time in the Sahel region, Francophone Africa. I hope there's no French embassy person here. The French screwed up Sahel, you know, they screwed it up there. They can't come to IGC events, but maybe there's some Americans here. But actually, global politics has screwed up the Sahel for decades, probably more than this part of the world, okay? And we have to be conscious about it. A development measure, what do I use? So, you know, in the book I write much more about it. It's just a shortcut. The point is a bit like I want to look at GDP per capita, because actually the correlation over longer periods of time with poverty reduction and with infant mortality is remarkably high. The Human Development Index correlates 98% with GDP per capita over 50-year periods, okay? In the short run, you can make inroads in human development things rather than other things. In the longer term, they move together. That's the vision I want to do. The inequality here, with the particular GDP you have, inequality comes in. You have so much poverty because of the level, not because of the growth rate, because of the level of GDP, and the inequality results in 80% extreme poverty. If you have 1,400 GDP per capita, but that is almost 3 times, 2.5 times, I suppose, as Malawi, GDP per capita, and you have roughly the same poverty rate, clearly it's inequality that plays the role. And so it is in my framework, and the high inequalities makes this elite bargain even more embarrassing, I would say, than the Malawian one, because actually you have the resources to far more, even on the basic social protection, health and education, than the resources could do. I don't know if it's helped. So I do use a broader thing, but in the long run they correlate remarkably strongly. The short run they don't, and I recognize that. I think that. Oh no, there was the point on the, oh sorry, the first point. What do you do? I'm sorry, someone asked me practical advice and I was avoiding that. Sorry. I mean, the first thing is, you know, the point is, when I'm a civil servant in London, as I was for a long time, or you are people here are civil servants in the system, you can't limit your conversation. You can't limit your conversation about, you know, or whether you work for an aid agency for that matter. You can't limit your conversation about politics over beer and pizza tonight in the evening, you know. You can't just complain about the politics and during the day behaving as if you can be a pure technocrat. It's around you, it's there. You don't need necessarily political economy analysis tools to know there's something rotten in FISP, there's something rotten in certain areas, okay? And so just try to bring in it. I've written a paper actually about how to give economic advice in a political environment. And it's a research paper I wrote. And the simple argument is, if you want to give advice in a political environment, understand the political constraints. It's a bit like the theory of the second best. So knowing that I can't fix this, how good can I do? Most of the time, we go for the first best, badly implemented. That's not the second best. The economists in the room, that's not the second best. The optimization, given the constraints, is not the same as poorly implementing what should be the first best. And that's what I kind of encourage to do. So if you want, I can connect you to more of it, but you work through examples where it actually becomes very visible. I'll give it as an example, or should I take more questions?
Give an example.
Yeah.
Give an example, but then we do quick 2 questions and then we go to closing.
Yeah. So I give an example. Take education, okay? And Kenya was a great example. So Kenya had an excellent, in Western Kenya, funded by USAID, and DFID and so on was involved, and it really was improving learning outcomes, working with the Ministry of Education. Really good. To Some, it was called. This was about 2010, 2011. The results came out, the evidence came out. Ministry of Education, sorry, liked it a lot. But Mr. Kenyatta had to run an election campaign. And running an election campaign on education with a very complicated program, I didn't like that. He said, I'm going to give every child a laptop. 1 laptop per child. One of the programs in the world that is the best evidence to show that they never work, okay? But it's really attractive. Now, I'm not going to accuse him of anything, but, you know, your friends in the procurement sector will like, you know, I'm very happy to import some laptops for you. That's a good amount of money, easy done, 1 contract, and I make millions. Anyway, laptops were distributed, ended up in the shelf, nothing happened. The new government came in, $340 million later, Nothing happened. So the Ministry of Education had just implemented a program that had no results and cost the Kenyan taxpayers $340 million. Now, not unfamiliar, I'm sure, to some people in the room, some of these kind of silver bullets. What would I say that they should have done? They should have said, look, we have a good program. In fact, what they all did, what the donors did, and what the Ministry of Education said, well, that's a really good program. They said, no, we're going to do that one. I said, oh, we can't do it, we do the other one. You could have thought, you know, what would happen if I put in a few laptops in that really good program? I know it won't work. It will probably cost us $20 million, but that's less than $340 million. And so he actually built in something and say, yeah, one of his friends will get quite rich from it. I'm sorry, it's a price I have to pay. Okay? But I build it in. And you could have built in a program that says, I make an extreme example, by the way. Mr. Kenyatta, don't sue me. But you see what I mean. You build it in and say, okay, what can I do knowing I can't do this? So we're talking FISP reform. I know I can't do it in one year, scrapping it entirely. So why don't I begin, in fact the government is doing it, turning it into vouchers that actually can buy more things. So what would I do next? I say, okay, the problem is that FISP is a real patronage system. It's one of the few things that you can get to the smallholders and do it. So the vouchers can't go away. They need to get something. But let the credit card, or the little card that is, let it buy a few more things. Initially, it's only in the agribusinesses. Maybe some friends and family will like that a lot, that it can be bought. But why didn't we actually say, and here through we say we can buy agricultural inputs, but if you want, you can buy medicine with it as well, with the card. So you can make a choice. Shall I buy inputs or use that money to buy some medicine? And slowly, you still have the patronage possibility. You turn it into a card and saying, there is so much kwacha on it and you can buy whatever you want of it. We have cash transfers. We have actually something that's far more efficient, far less capture possible, and you can move it. But you do that over a number of years. You move from something that's commodity-based and keep the patronage and keep the picture of whoever you want on it, as they did in Pakistan for a long time. The president's picture was on the card. And then you move it slowly. The new government came into power in Pakistan. The picture was changed. But it's no problem. It's clearly, it can do the purposes that you said. Do you see what I mean? You think through, how can I get things delivered? It's not perfect. Abolishing FISP would be far less distortive. But knowing you have to do it, how can I move it towards a cash transfer program over 5 years?
Perfect. So let's do final round of questions, and then I will ask everyone on the panel to, after Stefan speaks, to give closing remarks on what the key takeaways are. But if you can give some actions which you can take as part of your job as the head of ZIPA and the national coordinator for EAZ, how to push this agenda forward, that would be great. Who has burning questions? So let's go here.
It's on the other side, actually, for you as well. Back.
Let's start here and then let's go on the other side.
My name is Nyambe Myunda with ID Insight. Thanks again for a wonderful presentation, Professor Dercon. So during his opening remarks, Mr. Chikuba, I think it was, who mentioned the role that data and evidence has to play in sustainable development in Zambia. This question is a follow-on from that, and it's two parts. Professor, what, if any, do you see as the role of data and evidence in operationalizing the recommendations that you made? And if there's a role that there is indeed for data and evidence, what sort of enabling environment, or what are the prereqs for creating an enabling environment for that to be successful? Thanks.
I have a question. Since development is measured.
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Jonathan. Development is measured in terms of GDP, and here we are discussing the various factors that can result in that development. I don't know whether the prof is able to write us a formula in terms of the growth model. Like, you'll have the Gordon growth model, you'll have the one-term growth model,
University of Zambia, third-year student, economics major.
That's the best major. You're doing excellent.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir. So my question comes to, or it's based on us, the youth. So we've heard of development bargain in Zambia, but usually you find that when it comes to decision making, us, the youths, were not included. So what suggestion or advice can you give to us so that we may at least try to put ourselves out and to be heard? Yes. Thank you very
Perfect.
much.
Thank you. Is there any burning, very quick question anyone has before we? Can you go here, Rory, on the left, the lady?
Hi, my name is Musenge Chocha. I am an international relations student. So I missed the first part. I hope I'm not repeating on a topic that may have been touched. But considering the current political environment, I think we can agree may not be doing as much as it can towards, achieving sustainable development. So my question is to comment on any suggestions that you may have to improve the political environment so that sustainable development can be achieved. Thank you.
And is that all right? No one? I'm very tempted. Let's just, is that too many? Yeah. Also youth, you can't say no to youth, so.
Thank you very much. My name is Ebenezer, and I'm with ID Insight as well. You mentioned something around ensuring that we have good policies in operation for longer. I feel we have to think of practical ways of ensuring that. And my question is, do we really have, or do you have any recommendations of practical ways to ensure that we have good policies being in operation for longer, when we know that we will always have governments that want to, please the people? What are we thinking about? Nesting these in a more legally binding way? What exactly are we thinking about when we want to ensure that these policies stay in operation for longer? Secondly, when we want to include the elite in diversifying to more reliable or productive avenues, how much of this will really falls on the state, right? And this is to say, do we need to sort of incentivize the elites to play a role in ensuring that this bargain happens? Yeah, those are my two questions.
Thank you very much. I have to stop my temptation now, sorry. You have Stefan a lot, data, evidence, youth, a growth model to double, triple the GDP. Is sustainability a policy state-led?
So let me actually take the one that we could sit for a few years here about the growth model, the writing the model. I can write you any model, by the way, any mathematics. I'll happily write it, but whether it's real is another matter. The point is here, think a little bit in the following. The way these days people think about growth is, there's a long tradition on thinking about using a better technology, and I don't mean a better phone or whatever, but a better way of combining different inputs to actually get growth. But a lot of people talk about, the problem is often in very distorted settings. The capital labor is not allocated very sensibly, so we call this misallocation. So growth comes from bits and pieces to redirect capital and labor to somewhat better activities, okay? So I'm not going to write you down a model, but we can send you endless papers that try to do this. But it's the way to think about it. This is a heavily distorted. There's one distortion comes already from, you have that lump of natural resources that create already certain incentives. Another distortion then comes from agricultural policies. So you want to kind of say, okay, how do I get capital and labor to move to the right things? And that's part of it, actually creating a bit of an investment climate here. So it's nothing nothing dramatic, because actually a lot of the growth here can still come from just doing things one does better. Catch-up growth, you know? It's not about massive new innovation of inventing a new computer chip or a new product. It's catch-up growth. Actually, most of China's growth in the first few decades was catch-up growth. So it's like, you know, just allocating your resources better in terms of what you have. But I'm not going to say a huge amount of it, but it's probably the starting point to think about. And with a modest ambition, because, you know, it's not going to go fast. It's not, you're not going to be tripling GDP in 5 years. There's no country that triples GDP in this period. But you could think of, okay, let me put a number here, you know, a per capita growth rate of about 3% or 4%, which would be probably a nominal GDP growth of about 6-7%. Or sorry, not per capita, a total GDP growth of 6-7%. You know, it's not impossible to get several years, you know, when there is a drought, it's going to be harder and a commodity price thing, but you can do that. And it's adding a couple of percent here and there to it. Anyway, but if you really want someone to write you down that equation or a spreadsheet with it, you just visit McKinsey. McKinsey will give it to you anytime. They will charge you for it too. But, you know, it's, we don't really have that. It's in the fingertips to actually do this. Anyway, the question, yeah. Okay, so let me take you know, you asked a difficult question about how do you incentivize the elite to want to do this, okay? And it links a bit with the question on youth and the pressure, you know. What actually, where it tends to work is where there's enough people that can exercise influence, and big groups of people can do that, masses can as well, where legitimacy can be achieved through actually progress in growth and development, you know? Legitimacy seeking politics is a great beginning, is a way of doing it. Now, what do I mean by it? It's actually basically, you know, once you can, you know, you work in the sector, so to speak, once we can get a bit more outcome-based politics in it. Now, how can we help to engineer that? Well, civil society can engineer this by actually creating transparency around what are the outcomes that are being achieved at the local level. You have the CDF emerging. Well, as civil society begin to think about of how do you create transparency around it, what it actually delivered. We know from evidence in Ghana and in Kenya, where political systems are not that different from here, more and more MPs, political scientists showed this, more and more MPs and more governors were elected based on outcomes. And people were kicked out because you succeeded in creating more accountability mechanisms through civil society, through the press, informing the press. So these are things that you can do. This is where other people can do. This is also what young people can do, creating forms of pressure, not necessarily go in the streets with placards and sometimes ill-advised and only doing it for your own narrow benefit, but actually being really there and finding ways of pressuring. And so you know, as I said earlier, and then I kind of clarified, all countries that are successful had forms of accountability mechanisms, because accountability mechanisms create feedback. Okay, in China, it was all internal within the civil service. In India, in Bangladesh, and here, it will have to come from outside. Forms of external accountability, and find entry points in doing this. I think Zambia, you can do it. In Nigeria, it has always proved very hard. But I think you have still the environment where you can do it. And this links a bit back, you know, young people should just put pressure that there is legitimacy, not just by the constitution, but in terms of delivering progress in development, delivering development that is sustainable. I would like development actually first to happen, by the way. I don't start necessarily from sustainable development. I start from simple pressures, because we don't even see any form of development for a vast amount of people in the countryside. So, you know, I wouldn't mind. But yeah, but it is about making sure you put pressure on those people with power, that they have legitimacy in relative to populations. And I think that's where a lot of that works. And I'll come to the data point. You know, one of the big risks with a lot of data and evidence, I'll look at the IGC and all the things. No, one of the big risks is that in most countries, you know, my job in government was to make sure evidence was used in policy making. We can be very comfortable in our little corners doing that whole stuff, talking to some technocrats and so on. You can create endless data, but you should first start from the first principle. Most of the rich parts of the world developed without data, okay? So you have to ask yourself, if I had data, could I make it go a bit faster? You know, England didn't have data to steer the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution, okay? So it's not a necessary condition, definitely not a sufficient condition, but can we use it to make it go faster? Okay, and that's how consulted in a corner of a government department doing a monitoring and evaluation system where nobody pays attention to it there. So you need to think about it. Who will use my data and who will act on it? Okay? And I'll come back to that what I said earlier. Populations, politicians in Kenya and Ghana were forced to begin to act on it. In Nigeria, we had endless data being created, accountability things. And you talk to a government minister and say, why should I care? Because it's not how my politics works. So you look for your entry points. And I come back to it, use it as a way where you force political leaders and political influential people to get legitimacy. And you think of a theory of change. In this country, how can I use evidence? Because I've not met a politician who first says, oh, I want to do some evidence-based policy. They want power. They want to stay in office. I know as chief economist in DFID at the time, the one way I could do with the ministers is scare the hell out of them, I said, when they wanted to do something and said, you know, evidence tells us that this doesn't work. Often the negative role can work very well of evidence. You know, if you tell them it won't work, they say, oh my God, here's my advisor tells me it doesn't work. He will tell it later on to an investigation committee in Parliament. He will write it in a newspaper, and then it doesn't work. I am screwed, sorry. You know, so you find an entry point to use it, but you think about and that it can't be just a technocratic activity because it will have zero influence.
Sorry, Stefan, I've been being told that there's another event here soon. So
before
the start to say, but completely agree on the use of data and evidence as a tool rather than a sort of end all. Nicholas, do you want to have some sort of final quick remarks on what the conversation has been and any actions you want to take away?
Yes, I have something, but of course with that caution, then I had a lot. I didn't want to, like probably disturb you as you are trying to expound all these kinds of, responding to these questions that came through. Maybe before I go any further, allow me to recognize the senior economist present here. I'm happy to see that there are some, senior economists present. It's good to see you, sir. Behind you there. Yeah, Bob, yeah. Wonderful. So now, Prof, thank you for coming through, and thank you for this very interactive session. And I think you've attempted to respond to almost all the questions that came before you. Of course, there's one that I think I'll take you by the sidelines, that the gentleman at the far corner there, the one that asked something that around the population. It was a brilliant question and a very good thought that I feel you answered, you didn't answer somewhere there. Okay, good. What I'd want to echo in, as I'm trying to also give my closing remarks on my end, is that the concern by one of the colleagues that actually asked around the inclusion of youths. It's a very, I know youths have been a very important tool when it comes to political drive. Politicians tend to use youths to try and drive the agenda because probably I think they are the most energetic group, most vocal, but then on a sad end is that at the end of the day, they tend to be neglected. But don't lose hope. What I can actually encourage you is that let's make ourselves, let's validate our request to be included. Of course, on the policy making, it could not make some sense, but implementation end, I think that's where youth needs to be utilized most, and then there we can be included. there was also a very important aspect on the social economy policy. I think he's tried to respond on, where this is something to do with, political economy, where, politicians tend to always want to please the population during their time when they are leading. It's evident. It's not just only probably maybe Zambia, Africa. I think we've seen it even beyond Africa. This is one difficult issue that needs to be tackled in a very sensitive way, but I think by trying to agree, they always want to utilize that because probably they are in power. They are using that power which they have at that time. But then, allow me also just to maybe in closing saying that thank you for giving EAZ, a chance to appear, a chance to interact, a chance to speak one or two to you participants, as well as the professor and Zipper. I wouldn't do justice if I would end on my side without informing you, the economists that are here, that we want to welcome you and invite you to the next month's summit. We have a summit that we're actually going to be having. It will be at the Sierra Resort in Chongwe, and the dates are 25th and 26th of July 2024. This summit, it's a platform that we can actually utilize to come and interact on certain issues surrounding debt restructuring, economic sustainability, transformation, and growth. So I'll be looking forward to see you turn out in numbers the way you've turned out to this public lecture. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicholas. My friend, Zali, your thoughts?
Thank you. Let me turn back to the aspect of self-awareness that Professor Stefan kept on emphasizing. And on this note, I say that for Zambia, mining will continue to actually shape our economic outlook for a foreseeable future. But that is not to say that we must drop the ball with regard to our aspirations to transform the structure of our economy. We have to be emphatic about that economic transformation agenda because we need to decouple ourselves from the risk that comes with the resource curse over a small resource. Yes, we want to ramp up mining production in the near future, especially in terms of copper, but that should not keep us comfortable that now we have arrived. No, I think that should actually give us a thought. I think when we were working with Oxfam, we had this catchphrase where we're talking about copper for resource for growth, for development. So how are we going to use the proceeds that are going to come from the mining activities that we're going to ramp up? So should we just use them the way we have used them previously, or we should invest them in other strategic areas so that we can develop a sustainable base for development for this economy? As to what ZIPA should be doing to support the aspects of us getting the right path in terms of growth, sustaining long-term development perspective, we have noticed that we have serious issues with our transformation agenda, and right now we are using our pillar of the mandate, which is policy analysis and research, and which we are not working alone. We are working with several other partners in this room, and I mentioned earlier on that we have an MOU with IGC and a few other partners in the room. We will do a lot of research in the area of economic transformation. There's already something that is ongoing at ZIPA, and very soon we should be disseminating the results. But disseminating those results to who? I think we need to accelerate the messaging. We need to accelerate the messaging beyond rooms like this one. We need to use every platform that is available. But of course, we do have our policy and advocacy pillar also to promote, and with IGC, we are going to take this all the way. We have already agreed that we're going to use a combination of local researchers and international researchers so that we can enrich the perspectives that are coming from such kind of activities. So we are also cognizant that there's a lot of training that has to be undertaken. We do have young and upcoming researchers, and we do offer platforms. We want to offer platforms for their training and development in the area of policy analysis and research, so that we can grow a cohort of researchers that are able to provide meaningful support for policy making and management in this economy. So I think the doors are open for all those that would wish to collaborate. I think very soon we'll be signing an MOU with the University of Zambia, Mulungushi University. The idea is that we should stop working in silos. We should actually cooperate. We do have an MOU with ID Insight, and sir, we need to operationalize that MOU. We have operationalized the MOU with IDC, and this is the result. We need to operationalize the MOU we have with you, and something big should come out of there. So I think let's look forward to bigger things as we move forward. Thank you.
You guys should follow our lead. Thank you very much, Zali. Do you have any final thoughts, Stefan? Or?
No, I just would thank you for staying for so long, and sorry for it running over so long, but it was great to talk to you all.
So on behalf of the IGC, first of all, thank you to our partners in ZIPA and the Economic Association of Zambia. Of course, a really strong relationship with ZIPA, and hopefully a stronger relationship with the Economic Association going forward. Again, thank you to the organizing committee, both from the IGC, the team sort of back there who's been working a lot to make this possible, and also from ZIPA and the association. And finally, thank you, Professor, for taking time out and listening to questions. We have tea and coffee outside. I know it's a bit late for coffee, but perhaps tea is slightly suitable. And some nibbles, and I think Professor might stay for a bit, so you can ask him more politically sensitive questions in person. Thank you very much.